The faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves clung to Silas Blackwood's small wooden cabin, a perpetual aroma that spoke of its deep integration with the sprawling New England woods. The cabin itself, nestled precariously close to the ancient, whispering pines, seemed less a structure imposed upon the landscape and more an organic outgrowth of it, its weathered timbers blending seamlessly with the gnarled bark of the surrounding trees. Inside, the quiet hum of Silas's existence was punctuated by the gentle, rhythmic tick-tock of an antique grandfather clock in the corner, a relic of a time when precision was a cherished craft, not merely a factory setting. Its brass pendulum swung with an almost hypnotic regularity, marking the passage of moments, hours, and years, each beat an echo in the profound silence of his life. A low, contented crackle emanated from the cast-iron stove, where seasoned oak logs slowly surrendered to the flames, their fiery demise casting flickering shadows that danced across the worn floorboards, illuminating dust motes suspended in the still air. The warmth emanating from the stove was a tangible comfort, a small bastion against the persistent chill that always seemed to seep in from the encroaching forest. Silas, a man whose hands bore the indelible marks of a lifetime spent coaxing order from chaos, moved with a practiced, almost meditative grace. His fingers, though gnarled with age and etched with countless tiny scars, retained a remarkable dexterity, a surgeon's precision. His mornings were a symphony of tiny, intricate movements. With the meticulous patience of a watchmaker, he'd sit at his workbench, illuminated by the soft, focused glow of a single brass lamp, and meticulously repair the discarded detritus of modern life. He wasn't a mere fixer, he was a restorer, a quiet alchemist transforming brokenness back into functionality. A neighbor's broken cuckoo clock, its jovial bird silenced by rusted gears, would hum back to life under his touch. A sputtering radio, once consigned to static, would again fill his cabin with the faint, crackling voices of distant news anchors. A vintage record player, refusing to spin its melancholic tunes, would once more fill the air with the warm, analog sound of bygone eras. His tools, an array of gleaming tiny screwdrivers, delicate tweezers, and powerful magnifying glasses, lay in ordered rows, each one an extension of his own weathered fingers, each one a testament to his innate mechanical genius. He found a profound, almost spiritual satisfaction in restoring these neglected mechanisms, breathing new life into forgotten objects. It was a silent conversation between man and machine, a language he understood intimately, a language that provided him with a solace no human words could offer. Yet, as the afternoon sun began to dip below the towering pines, casting long, slender shadows across the forest floor, a different rhythm would take hold. This was the time for Barley, his golden retriever, a dog whose silvered muzzle and slow, deliberate gait betrayed his advanced years, but whose eyes still held the spark of unwavering loyalty and boundless affection. Barley was Silas's solitary companion, a furry echo in the quiet expanse of his life, a constant, comforting presence. His deep, rumbling snores by the fireplace, the soft thump of his tail against the floor when Silas entered a room, the gentle weight of his head resting on Silas's knee. These were the only sounds of companionship Silas now knew. Together, they would embark on long, meandering walks deep into the heart of the forest. Silas, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn flannel jacket, his gaze fixed on the endless green expanse, would observe the silent theater of nature, the chittering of unseen squirrels, the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush, the way the light dappled through the canopy, creating shifting mosaics of sun and shadow on the forest floor. Barley, ever eager, his nose twitching with the tantalizing sense of the wild, would bound ahead, his tail a perpetual pendulum of joy, occasionally disappearing into the denser thickets, only to reappear moments later, a stick or a forgotten pine cone clutched triumphantly in his mouth, a proud offering to his human companion. Back in the cabin, As darkness fully enveloped the woods, the evenings often brought a melancholic silence. Silas would prepare a simple meal, often a stew or a hearty soup. The clinking of cutlery against his single plate, a stark, painful reminder of the absence that permeated his home. The empty chair opposite him at the small wooden table seemed to mock his solitude, a ghost of conversations long past. He'd often catch himself staring out the window, his gaze distant, lost in the inky blackness of the night sky, punctuated only by the distant, cold twinkle of stars. There was a quiet, unspoken sorrow in his eyes, a phantom limb of a past happiness that had been severed long ago, a grief too deep and too personal to articulate. He rarely spoke of it, or anything personal for that matter. His life was a carefully constructed fortress of solitude, designed to keep the world out, and his deeper emotions safely locked within, away from prying eyes and sympathetic glances he couldn't bear. One brisk autumn afternoon, as Silas was returning from his routine visit to the general store, his old Ford pickup rattling over the gravel road, he heard a faint, persistent chirping from the base of an old maple tree near his property line. It was a sound of desperate vulnerability, a tiny beacon of distress. He pulled the truck over, his brow furrowed with concern, and followed the sound, his eyes scanning the gnarled roots and fallen leaves. And there, nestled amongst the vibrant mosaic of autumn foliage, was a tiny, barely feathered chick, no bigger than his thumb, its fragile wing bent at an unnatural angle. It was clearly dislodged from its nest, a victim of circumstance, vulnerable and utterly helpless. Most people might have left it to the whims of nature, a sad but unavoidable casualty of the wild. But Silas, with his quiet, inherent compassion, couldn't. His engineer's mind, accustomed to fixing broken things, instinctively recoiled from the sight of such fragility. He gently scooped up the trembling creature, its ephemeral warmth a tiny spark in his calloused palm. Back in his cabin, with the comforting presence of Barley observing from his rug by the stove, Silas meticulously fashioned a makeshift nest from an old shoebox lined with soft, clean rags. With painstaking care, his large, capable fingers moving with surprising delicacy, he gently straightened the tiny wing, wrapping it loosely with a thin strip of gauze torn from an old, clean shirt. His movements were slow, precise. His breath held as he worked, as if any sudden motion might shatter the fragile life in his hands. For the next few days, he became the chick's sole guardian, feeding it with a dropper filled with water and crushed seeds, meticulously checking its progress every few hours, his stern features softened by a tenderness he rarely showed. Barley watched, head cocked, occasionally nudging Silas's hand with his wet nose, as if offering his own quiet encouragement, a silent accomplice in this act of unexpected kindness. When the little bird, surprisingly resilient, finally flapped its mended wing and took hesitant flight from his outstretched hand, soaring towards the maple tree, a rare, genuine smile touched Silas's lips. It was a fleeting moment of pure, unadulterated triumph, a quiet affirmation of his capacity for care, a subtle declaration that beneath the layers of his reserved exterior, a gentle, compassionate heartbeat, yearning for connection, even with the smallest of creatures. The quiet rhythm of his days continued, a deceptive calm, but a subtle shift began to occur, initiated not by Silas, but by Barley. It started innocently enough, just another of Barley's curious finds from his forays into the deeper parts of the forest. One afternoon, Barley bounded back from his usual exploration, not with a simple stick or a pine cone, but with a short, rusty piece of cable, its strands frayed and metallic sheen long gone, its surface gritty with years of earth and decay. Silas barely noticed, simply shrugging it off as another of Barley's odd forest treasures. "All right, old boy," he'd mumbled, ruffling the dog's head, before tossing the cable into a forgotten corner of the shed. "That's certainly unique." A few days later, It was a distorted fragment of metal, heavy and surprisingly dense for its size. Its edges were jagged, as if torn from a larger structure, and its surface bore the telltale signs of immense pressure and heat. It looked almost industrial, alien in the natural setting of the woods. But Silas, still dismissing the peculiarity, again relegated it to the shed. Just some old scrap, he thought, placing it on a shelf with other forgotten odds and ends, never truly examining it. Then, a week after that, a more significant shift occurred. Barley returned, his tail wagging furiously, a look of profound accomplishment and urgency in his intelligent, amber eyes. This time, he carried a single, rusty bolt, its threads thick with layers of oxidation, its hexagonal head scarred and pitted, as if it had endured unimaginable stress. It wasn't just rusty. It was anciently rusty, its corrosion a deep, unyielding red-brown, a color that spoke of decades, perhaps centuries, of slow, inexorable decay. Silas, as he always did, ruffled Barley's ears, then took the bolt. He held it for a moment, turning it over in his fingers. It was heavier than it looked, its weight surprising, hinting at a density of metal far beyond ordinary hardware. He almost tossed it onto the growing pile of Barley's bizarre treasures in the shed. But something, an almost imperceptible tug of curiosity, a faint echo of his dormant engineer's mind, made him pause. He ran his thumb over the rough, pitted surface. It felt deliberate. It possessed a strange kind of precision, a robust quality that defied its rusted exterior. He couldn't quite place why, but it felt different from the other random bits of metal Barley had brought him. It felt like a message. As Silas worked on a particularly stubborn antique clock later that evening, his eyes instinctively drifted to a faint, raised scar on the back of his right hand. It wasn't jagged or angry, but a smooth, almost artistic line, a testament to an old, healed wound. Its origin was a fuzzy, almost blank space in his memory, a detail he had long since stopped trying to recall, a past he had actively suppressed. Yet, as his fingers traced the cool, corroded metal of the rusty bolt, the scar seemed to tingle faintly, a ghostly echo of a past he couldn't quite grasp, a forgotten connection to the very nature of this strange artifact. The bolt, so seemingly insignificant, nestled in his palm, was a whisper from a forgotten world, a silent, unsettling prelude to the storm gathering just beyond the tree line, a storm that would shatter the fragile peace of his solitary existence and force him to confront the buried secrets of his past. The simple, rusty bolt, an unwitting messenger, had begun its work. The quiet rhythm of Silas's days began to unravel, not with a bang, but with the persistent, rhythmic thump of something metallic hitting his doorstep. It started subtly, a lone, rusty bolt appearing every few days, an oddity he could easily dismiss. But then, they began to multiply. 2, then 3, then a small pile, all strikingly identical, the same dense, pitted metal, the same precise threading, the same deep, ancient rust that seemed to defy the very notion of time. Each one was a silent, insistent offering from Barley, who, with an almost human understanding, would drop the bolt at Silas's feet with a soft whine and an urgent, unwavering gaze, then sit expectantly, tail wagging, as if waiting for Silas to finally understand the profound message he was trying to convey. Silas, initially, treated it as a peculiar nuisance, a canine eccentricity he had to tolerate. "Barley, old boy, what is this obsession?" he'd murmur, a note of exasperation creeping into his voice as he nudged a newly arrived bolt with his boot. He tried reasoning with the dog, even gently scolding him, explaining, "These are just old scraps, Barley, nothing important." He even went so far as to gather the accumulating pile of bolts and throw them back into the deepest part of the woods, hoping to discourage the bizarre habit. But Barley, with an almost uncanny determination, and a cunning born of deep-seated purpose, managed to slip his collar each time Silas tried to tether him, disappearing into the dense undergrowth only to reappear minutes later. Another identical rusty bolt, a testament to his uncanny persistence. His eyes, usually filled with playful mischief, now held a solemn intensity that tugged at something deep within Silas. The sheer stubbornness of the dog, combined with the unnerving uniformity of the bolts, began to chip away at Silas's carefully constructed indifference. He found himself picking one up, turning it over in his hand with a newfound scrutiny. It wasn't just any bolt. His engineer's eye, long accustomed to the minute details of precision and purpose, immediately registered the subtle intricacies. The threading was unusually fine, designed for immense torque, far beyond what any common machinery would require. The metal, even beneath layers of deep, stubborn rust, felt exceptionally strong, impossibly dense. Unlike anything used in common construction or farming equipment, it was clearly a component built for extreme pressure, for something heavy-duty, something industrial, on a scale Silas couldn't immediately comprehend. A cold, unfamiliar prickle of unease ran down his spine. Why would such a specialized, robust piece of hardware be scattered in the quiet, isolated woods of Oakhaven? A dormant part of Silas's mind, the part that once thrived on complex problems and intricate designs, began to stir, slowly but inexorably. It was a quiet awakening, a flicker of the intellectual curiosity he had painstakingly extinguished years ago, burying it under layers of rural solitude. He found himself picking up a second bolt, then a third, laying them out on his workbench. A silent chorus of questions. He pulled out a magnifying glass, the same one he used for delicate clockwork, and examined the threads, the faint stampings, the minute imperfections that spoke of a specific manufacturing process. The more he looked, the more the pieces defied explanation as mere scrap. They were too precise, too robust, too designed for a singular, potent purpose. A peculiar fascination, tinged with a growing sense of foreboding, began to take hold. This wasn't just Barley's strange game. It was a riddle, a complex puzzle crafted not by nature, but by human hands, and it demanded to be solved. His quiet life, once a serene lake reflecting the peaceful skies, was now being disturbed by persistent ripples, each one carrying the weight of an unspoken question, each one pushing him towards an inescapable truth. The decision to investigate, to truly delve into the mystery of the rusty bolts, was made not with conscious deliberation, but with an almost involuntary pull, a recognition that he simply could not return to ignoring the persistent messenger. The path forward, though uncertain, now felt inevitable. The increasing oddity of Barley's behavior, and Silas's subsequent preoccupation, did not go unnoticed in the small, tightly knit community of Oakhaven. Word travels fast in rural towns, carried on whispers and observations, amplified by boredom and a natural inclination towards gossip. Silas's reclusive nature had always made him a subject of quiet speculation, and now his apparent obsession with junk only added fuel to the fire. One such observation reached the ears of Sheriff Brody, a man whose practical sensibilities and unwavering commitment to maintaining the peaceful status quo often bordered on suspicion. Brody was a local through and through, a man who preferred predictable rhythms and familiar faces, viewing any deviation as a potential precursor to trouble. He viewed Silas, the reclusive engineer who kept to himself and his dog, as an eccentric, a harmless oddball whose presence, while tolerated, often raised a silent eyebrow. The idea of some old man and his dog finding something important felt inherently disruptive, a potential headache he wanted to nip in the bud. He had a natural, almost visceral skepticism for anything that deviated from the mundane, and the notion of mysterious artifacts from the woods bordered on the ridiculous to him, a clear sign of an overactive imagination in an old man. "He's been acting strange, Sheriff," whispered Mrs. Henderson, a neighbor whose porch overlooked Silas's property and who always seemed to know everyone's business before they did. Spending all his time with those rusty bits, and that dog always digging, bringing things back. Her voice was a low, conspiratorial murmur, laced with a mix of genuine concern and thinly veiled judgment. Brody sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair, a gesture of weary resignation. "All right, Mrs. Henderson, I'll take a look when I'm out that way. Probably just some old farm equipment or something rusted from the logging days." His tone was dismissive, designed to reassure and downplay, but a flicker of irritation crossed his features. He didn't like disruptions, and the thought of an elderly man stirring up trouble in the otherwise tranquil woods of Oakhaven rubbed him the wrong way. He valued stability above all else, and Silas's peculiar discoveries threatened that equilibrium. Across town, in the dusty, quiet archives of the Oakhaven Historical Society, Dr. Evelyn Reed was a woman who lived for disruptions, especially those that hinted at forgotten histories. A local historian with a particular passion for the Cold War era in the region, Evelyn was known for her meticulous research and her uncanny ability to unearth overlooked details from obscure documents and forgotten folklore. Her office, a haven of academic pursuit, was a labyrinth of maps, old photographs, and dog-eared journals, each one a portal to the past, each creaking shelf laden with the untold stories of her small corner of the world. She saw history not as a static collection of facts, but as a living, breathing entity, constantly revealing new layers. Evelyn had heard the murmurs about Silas Blackwood and his dog. Initially, she dismissed it as mere local gossip, a harmless diversion. But then, a fragment of conversation overheard at the local diner caught her attention. Some kind of old metal, from deep in the woods. Looks like nothing anyone's seen before. All rusted. Heavy like a battleship. Her historian's antennae immediately twitched. She had spent years researching abandoned military installations, decommissioned bunkers, and secret training grounds that dotted the New England landscape during the Cold War. The government, in its paranoia, had a habit of building covert facilities in remote, seemingly unremarkable areas. Her knowledge of the arcane details of Cold War-era construction and technology was extensive, a fact often overlooked by those who saw her merely as a quiet academic poring over dusty books. She had always believed there were still undiscovered secrets lurking beneath the tranquil facade of the region. She made a mental note to visit Silas Blackwood. Perhaps, just perhaps, his eccentric discoveries held a thread to a larger, forgotten story, a missing piece of the historical puzzle she had been assembling for years. Her curiosity was piqued, a quiet but insistent flame igniting in the depths of her scholarly mind, hinting at the potential for a historical revelation that could reshape Oakhaven's unassuming past. The rusty bolts, unknown to Silas, were already pulling three disparate lives together, each with their own biases and beliefs, towards an unforeseen collision with history. Driven by an engineer's insatiable curiosity and the unwavering, almost desperate persistence of Barley, Silas Blackwood finally decided to approach the mystery of the rusty bolts with the seriousness it demanded. He moved from his small, utilitarian kitchen table to his true sanctuary, the old, dusty workshop attached to the back of his cabin. It was a space that had long lain dormant, its shelves laden with cobweb-draped equipment, its air thick with the faint, nostalgic scent of machine oil and sawdust. He cleared a spot on his sturdy wooden workbench, pushing aside an incomplete grandfather clock and a pile of old blueprints, making room for the enigmatic metallic offerings. He picked up one of the bolts, its weight surprisingly substantial, in his palm, and placed it under the bright, focused beam of his old inspection lamp. He reached for his most trusted tools, a set of fine-tipped calipers, a micrometer, and a high-powered jeweler's loupe, each one an extension of his own meticulously trained hand. He didn't just look, he analyzed. His mind, long accustomed to unraveling complex mechanical puzzles, immediately recognized the subtle nuances. The thread pitch was unusually precise, designed for an exceptionally tight, secure fit, indicating a connection that needed to withstand enormous stress and vibration. The alloy, even beneath layers of stubborn ancient rust, had a distinctive sheen, a robustness that hinted at specialized metallurgy, far beyond the ordinary steel of common hardware. It was a material built to endure extreme conditions, to defy the relentless march of time and the corrosive forces of nature. Silas meticulously measured the bolt's dimensions, comparing them against the specifications he intuitively held in his vast mental library of engineering standards. He noted the subtle chamfers, the unique head markings, the precise machining marks that were almost invisible to the naked eye. This wasn't merely a piece of scrap. It was a component, exquisitely engineered, undoubtedly part of a larger, highly complex system. His professional instincts, honed over decades, screamed of something significant. It had to be from something truly monumental, perhaps a massive piece of heavy machinery, an industrial complex, or even, his mind reluctantly considered, a high-security military installation. The thought sent a faint shiver down his spine. Why would such a thing be in his peaceful, isolated woods? As he worked, lost in the methodical process of analysis, a series of fragmented images flickered through Silas's mind, unbidden and almost dreamlike. He saw glimpses of colossal steel girders rising against a bleak, concrete sky, heard the deafening roar of massive ventilation fans, felt the tremor of earth-shaking machinery. He remembered the precise, almost obsessive diagrams, the classified blueprints, the hushed, urgent voices of men in drab uniforms. And then, there was the searing pain, a sharp metallic tang in the air, and the blinding flash of light. He instinctively looked down at his right hand, tracing the smooth, raised scar on the back of his palm. It was a faint, almost artistic line, a testament to an old, healed wound whose origin he had actively suppressed for decades. For years, he had deliberately pushed these memories to the deepest recesses of his mind, locking them away in a vault of self-imposed amnesia. But now, as he held the rusty bolt, the scar seemed to tingle faintly, a ghostly echo of a past he couldn't quite grasp. Yet that felt intimately connected to the very nature of this strange artifact. It was a past he had walked away from, a skill set he had buried, all to escape the haunting responsibility of something. His prodigious analytical abilities and deep engineering knowledge, long dormant, were now undeniably awakened, revealing themselves in this involuntary, almost desperate act of problem-solving. He wasn't showing off. He was compelled, drawn by an invisible force stronger than his desire for solitude. The sharp rapping on Silas's cabin door, sudden and insistent, startled him, pulling him violently from his contemplative state. Barley, who had been dozing contentedly by the stove, immediately sprang to attention, letting out a low, rumbling growl. Silas straightened up, pushing the bolts out of immediate view, his old instincts of discretion kicking in. He opened the door to find Sheriff Brody standing on his porch, his face set in a look of stern disapproval. Brody's uniform was crisp, his posture stiff, projecting an air of official authority that always seemed out of place against the rustic backdrop of Oakhaven. He was exactly as Silas had expected. Practical, skeptical, and utterly unyielding in his belief that he knew what was best for the town. "Mr. Blackwood," Brody began, his voice flat, his gaze sweeping over Silas's shoulder, trying to peer into the dimly lit workshop. "Got a call from Mrs. Henderson. Says your dog's been, excavating the woods. And you've been, well, acting peculiar, is how she put it." Brody's eyes finally landed on the workbench, where a few of Silas's more complex tools still lay exposed, glinting under the lamp. His gaze lingered on the faint glint of a micrometer, a tool far too specialized for old farm equipment. A flicker of something unreadable crossed Brody's face. Not comprehension, but perhaps mild perplexity, quickly replaced by his usual dismissive certainty. "What is all this, Mr. Blackwood? Some kind of hobby?" Silas, ever laconic. Simply replied, "Just some old metal. Sheriff. Nothing to concern yourself with." He tried to project an air of casual indifference, but his grip tightened on the doorframe. He knew Brody wouldn't understand. Brody, seeing the intricate tools and the general air of methodical strangeness, merely scoffed. "Look, Mr. Blackwood, I'm all for folks enjoying their retirement, but I've got a town to keep peaceful. And whispers about strange doings in the woods, especially with Old Man Johnson complaining about mysterious sounds down near his property. Those don't make for peace. Just stick to your clocks. All right, no need to go stirring up trouble where there isn't any." Brody's tone was condescending, his words dripping with the unspoken assumption that Silas was nothing more than a senile old eccentric, prone to flights of fancy. He saw a man obsessing over a rusty bolt, not a brilliant mind on the verge of a profound discovery. Just as Brody was about to turn, ready to deliver his final dismissive warning, a car pulled up on the gravel drive, kicking up a plume of dust. It was an older model sedan, well-maintained but unassuming. From it emerged Dr. Evelyn Reed, her face framed by soft, intelligent eyes, her movements deliberate and curious. She carried a worn leather satchel overflowing with papers and notebooks. Evelyn was not the typical small-town academic. She possessed a keen intellect and an almost boundless curiosity, tempered by years of painstaking research. She had heard the same rumors as Brody, but her approach was entirely different. Where Brody saw nuisance, Evelyn saw potential historical significance. She had been tracking local legends about abandoned Cold War installations for years, and Silas's unusual finds resonated with her research. She had simply dropped by on the pretense of inquiring about a local historical society event, but her true purpose was to assess the situation. Evelyn, seeing the sheriff and Silas, offered a polite, professional smile. "Sheriff Brody, Mr. Blackwood, I hope I'm not interrupting." Her gaze immediately fell upon the workbench, catching a glimpse of the rusty bolt and Silas's analytical setup. Her historian's mind, primed for recognizing historical artifacts, instantly registered the bolt's unusual characteristics. Her eyes, sharp and perceptive, widened almost imperceptibly. She could see the intricate tooling, the robust design, something far beyond ordinary hardware. She didn't see junk. She saw a piece of a forgotten puzzle. "What fascinating work, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice genuinely intrigued, a stark contrast to Brody's dismissive tone. "Is that an old military-grade component? Perhaps it has the distinct look of mid-20th century heavy engineering." Silas, momentarily stunned by Evelyn's immediate, almost uncanny recognition, offered a rare, slight nod. He was unaccustomed to such sharp observation, such instant validation of his hidden knowledge. Brody, however, scoffed louder. "Military Doctor Reed, it's just a rusty old bolt from the woods. Mr. Blackwood here is just letting his imagination run wild." He shot Silas a warning glance, an unspoken threat hanging in the air. "Now, Mr. Blackwood," Brody continued, turning back to Silas, his voice dropping to a low, stern register. "I mean what I said. The peace of this town is my priority. If I hear about any more strange digging, any disturbances in the woods, or if you cause any unnecessary alarm, I'll have to hold you responsible. Is that clear?" It wasn't just a warning. It was a thinly veiled threat, a clear declaration of Brody's authority and his firm desire to maintain the deceptive calm of Oakhaven, even if it meant suppressing a potential truth. He then turned and, with a curt nod to Evelyn, walked briskly back to his patrol car, leaving Silas and Evelyn standing awkwardly on the porch. As Brody's cruiser disappeared down the gravel road, leaving a lingering cloud of dust, Evelyn turned to Silas, her expression a mix of awe and renewed curiosity. "He has no idea, does he?" she murmured, more to herself than to Silas, referring to Brody. She gestured towards the workshop. "May I see it properly, Mr. Blackwood?" That bolt, it's quite extraordinary. My research suggests there were several covert government projects in this area during the Cold War. Unconfirmed, of course. But if that bolt is what I suspect, it could be a crucial piece of a forgotten puzzle. Her words, delivered with intellectual passion, were a lifeline, a validation of Silas's burgeoning suspicions. Unbeknownst to them, deep within the intricate web of digital surveillance and human intelligence, a different kind of attention had been drawn to Oakhaven. A shadowy entity, operating with the cold precision of a well-oiled machine, had begun to register anomalies. Dispatches from local law enforcement, routine patrol reports about eccentric residents and odd finds, coupled with the unexpected appearance of a historian specializing in Cold War secrets, had triggered silent alarms. This entity, a highly secretive, quasi-governmental organization tasked with preserving classified assets, felt a tremor in the quiet certainty of its long-held secrets. They had been watching Oakhaven, or rather, something in Oakhaven, for decades, ensuring its undisturbed slumber. The whispers of a dog bringing back strange artifacts, and an old man with an engineer's mind analyzing them, coupled with a historian's sudden interest, were too many coincidences. A name, long buried in an obscure database, silently flickered on a monochrome screen. Silas Blackwood. The organization had begun to actively monitor Silas's property, their surveillance invisible, their intentions ominous. Silas and Evelyn were no longer merely curious. They were now targets, their quest for truth inadvertently placing them directly in the crosshairs of a powerful, unseen force determined to keep its Cold War secrets buried, no matter the cost. The silence of the forest was about to be broken, not by the rustling of leaves, but by the subtle, menacing hum of unseen eyes. The rusty bolts, once mere curiosities, now felt like lead weights in Silas's pockets, pulling him inexorably deeper into the woods, deeper into a past he had painstakingly tried to forget. The dismissal from Sheriff Brody had only hardened his resolve, transforming his engineer's curiosity into a quiet, almost defiant quest for truth. And Evelyn Reed's unexpected insight, her immediate grasp of the bolt's potential significance, had solidified his belief that this was more than just a strange canine habit. This was a trail, laid by rust and time, leading to something monumental. The morning of their expedition dawned crisp and clear, the autumn air biting with a promise of winter. Silas, equipped with a sturdy backpack containing a compass, maps, a first aid kit, and a thermos of hot coffee, stood on his porch. Barley, sensing the seriousness of the venture, stood sentinel by his side, his tail barely wagging, his gaze fixed on the dense tree line. Soon, Evelyn's sedan pulled up, her presence a welcome counterpoint to Silas's inherent solitude. She emerged, dressed practically in hiking boots and a durable jacket, carrying a large satchel filled with historical maps, a GPS device, and a compact digital camera. Her eyes, bright with intellectual fervor, met Silas's. "Ready, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, a hint of excitement in her voice. Silas merely nodded, a grim determination set on his features. "As will ever be, Dr. Reed." They plunged into the forest, following Barley, whose nose, now acutely focused, led them away from the familiar logging trails and deeper into areas Silas rarely ventured. The woods, once a familiar sanctuary for Silas, began to transform. The dappled sunlight of his usual walks gave way to a perpetual twilight as the canopy thickened, the ancient pines forming a cathedral ceiling that seemed to swallow sound. The familiar rustling of leaves underfoot was replaced by the muffled crunch of decaying pine needles, thick and spongy. The air grew heavier, laced not just with the scent of pine and damp earth, but with an unsettling metallic tang that made the hairs on Silas's arms prickle. As they pressed on, the subtle hints of human intrusion began to multiply. Silas, with his keen eye for anything man-made in a natural setting, pointed out anomalies. "Look here," he'd murmur, indicating a line of trees whose growth seemed stunted, unnaturally uniform, as if planted to conceal something. Further on, they found patches of ground where the underbrush seemed unnaturally sparse, the soil compacted in a way that suggested heavy machinery had once passed through. They discovered faint, almost invisible, depressions in the earth, forming a pattern that Silas, after a moment of intense concentration, recognized. "These are old cable trenches," he stated, his voice low, a mix of awe and dread. "Buried, deep, not for power lines, too robust, for something else." Evelyn, though knowledgeable about historical records, was still largely reliant on Silas's practical expertise. She would consult her maps, cross-referencing old land deeds and rumored government purchases from the Cold War era. "My maps show this area as untouched wilderness," she'd admit, her brow furrowed. "No official record of any construction here." This only deepened the unsettling realization whatever they were approaching. It was highly classified, deliberately erased from public knowledge. The forest, their symbolic gauntlet, became an increasingly oppressive environment. Silas, the old engineer, felt the cold weight of his past rising to meet him. He recognized the subtle signs of a hidden infrastructure, the quiet violence inflicted upon the natural world to conceal something massive. He felt a growing sense of urgency, a primal fear mingled with an undeniable drive to uncover the truth. But despite Evelyn's growing conviction, Silas still felt a profound sense of solitude in his understanding. She could interpret the historical implications, but only he could truly read the silent language of the earth and the traces of forgotten technology. Barley, meanwhile, remained their unwavering guide, his ears swiveling, his pace unwavering. As if he knew the destination implicitly, his focused determination was a silent rebuke to any lingering doubts. As they ventured deeper, the sounds of the natural world faded, replaced by an eerie, unnatural quiet. The chirping of birds ceased. The rustling of leaves grew distant. It was as if the forest itself held its breath, sensing their intrusion. This oppressive silence was occasionally broken by fleeting, almost imperceptible sounds. A faint, metallic clank carried on the wind, a low, persistent hum that vibrated through the soles of their boots, barely audible but undeniably present. Silas instinctively paused, straining his ears, his senses on high alert. He could feel it, the distinct resonance of machinery operating deep underground. "Did you hear that?" Silas whispered, his voice barely a breath. Evelyn nodded, her face pale. "Like a generator, but so far away." Her academic curiosity was now tinged with a palpable fear. The tension mounted with each step. They encountered a series of ancient, discolored warning signs, almost swallowed by moss and ivy. Silas carefully peeled back the overgrowth on one U.S. government property. "Trespassers will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Another, more chilling, read, "Authorized personnel only. Danger high voltage. Restricted access." These were not the signs of a forgotten logging camp or a derelict farm. These were military warnings, deliberately placed, then deliberately abandoned, yet still potent. Then, they found it. A perimeter of barbed wire, rusty and sagging, but unmistakably a fence designed to keep intruders out. It was old, partially collapsed in places, but stretched in a continuous line, vanishing into the dense thicket on either side. Beyond it, the trees seemed to grow even thicker, forming an almost impenetrable wall. A faint, almost imperceptible trail snaked alongside the fence, barely visible to the untrained eye. Barley, with a soft whimper of anticipation, nudged Silas towards it, his nose sniffing excitedly. "This is it," Evelyn breathed, her voice trembling slightly. Her GPS confirmed their position. They were precisely where her most speculative maps indicated a blank spot, a supposed anomaly in the cartography of the region during the height of the Cold War. This is the ghost on the old government blueprints. As they cautiously followed the fence line, Silas felt an unnerving sense of being watched. It wasn't a squirrel or a deer. It was something else. A cold, calculating gaze. He instinctively scanned the tree line, his eyes sweeping over the shadows, searching for any unnatural movement. He found nothing, but the feeling persisted, a prickle on the back of his neck. Suddenly, Evelyn's phone buzzed violently in her pocket. She pulled it out, her face going pale as she read the incoming message. It was from an unknown number, a short, chilling text. "Turn back. Now. Your curiosity is dangerous." Her hand trembled, almost dropping the phone. She looked at Silas, her eyes wide with fear. "Silas, someone knows we're here. They're warning us off." Almost simultaneously, a faint, almost imperceptible whirring sound came from the dense brush nearby. Too mechanical for an animal, too regular for the wind. It was the subtle sound of a drone, high above, its cameras undoubtedly fixed on them. Silas's gaze darted to the sound, then back to the thicket. He could almost feel the lens focusing on them, the cold, dispassionate eye of an unseen observer. "We don't have much time," Silas said, his voice grim, his eyes fixed on the impenetrable tree line beyond the fence. The air, once merely cold, now felt charged, heavy with an unspoken threat. The sense of urgency was overwhelming. They were no longer simply exploring. They were being hunted. The hunt for the truth had, inadvertently, made them the hunted. The stakes had been raised, dramatically and violently, and Silas, the old man who had sought only quiet solitude, was now standing on the precipice of a dangerous, unseen conflict, with a chilling knowledge that could unravel decades of carefully constructed lies. The rusty bolts, once a simple canine offering, had become a key, unlocking a door to a secret that someone was willing to kill to keep buried. The warning, sharp and chilling, had solidified Silas's resolve. There was no turning back now. The rusty bolts, Barley's relentless persistence, Evelyn's historical insights, it had all led them to this point. The immediate danger, however, was no longer just the unseen observer, but the very environment itself. The barbed wire fence, ancient and partially collapsed, stretched as far as the eye could see, a grim testament to the decades it had stood guard. Silas, with a grim determination, found a section where the wire was rusted through, allowing them to carefully push aside the brittle strands and slip through. Barley squeezed through with surprising agility for his age, his eyes fixed ahead. Beyond the fence, the forest thickened, becoming an almost impenetrable wall of ancient pines and dense undergrowth. The air grew colder, and the metallic tang that Silas had noticed earlier intensified, a faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrating in the very air. Silas, now fully in his element, began to read the landscape with an almost preternatural intuition. He noticed subtle irregularities in the terrain, faint, unnatural depressions that suggested buried conduits, unnaturally uniform tree lines that hinted at deliberate planting for concealment, and the distinct, subtle smell of damp concrete beneath the earthy aroma of the forest floor. He pointed these out to Evelyn, who, while fascinated, relied entirely on his expert eye. "There's something massive beneath us," Silas murmured, his voice low, a mix of awe and trepidation. "I can feel it. The ground. It's different." Barley, meanwhile, no longer bounding playfully, walked with a focused intensity, his nose glued to the ground, pulling them deeper into the labyrinthine thicket. His occasional whines were not of distress, but of deep concentration, as if he were following an invisible scent trail known only to him. They pushed through dense rhododendron bushes, their branches clawing at their clothes, and climbed over fallen logs slick with moss. The faint, rhythmic thrumming grew steadily louder, a deep bass note resonating from the earth itself. Then, they saw it. Not a grand entrance, but a masterful feat of camouflage. Tucked away within a cluster of colossal, moss-covered boulders, partially concealed by a thick curtain of ivy and low-hanging branches, was a colossal metal door. It wasn't visible unless you were within a few feet, and even then, it appeared to be just another part of the rock face. Its surface was pitted and weathered, blending seamlessly with the granite. But Silas's keen eye immediately registered the faint outlines of massive hinges and an intricate locking mechanism. This was no ordinary bunker door. This was a fortress entrance, designed to withstand a nuclear blast, engineered for ultimate secrecy. The sheer scale and craftsmanship spoke of Cold War paranoia at its absolute peak. "My God," Evelyn breathed, her voice a mere whisper, her eyes wide with a mix of academic triumph and profound fear. "It's real. All the rumors, the classified reports I could never confirm. This is it. A ghost from the Cold War." She fumbled in her satchel for her camera, her hands trembling as she tried to document the astonishing discovery. Silas, however, was already moving, his engineer's mind buzzing with a renewed sense of purpose. He ran his calloused hands over the cold, rough surface of the door, his fingers tracing the faint lines of its construction. He tested the seams, ran his palm over the colossal bolts that secured it. He could feel the sheer density of the steel, the impenetrable nature of its design. His eyes, sharp and focused, meticulously scanned for any access points, any clues to its ancient locking system. This was his language, his domain. He remembered the intricate, multi-layered security systems of high-value government projects, a world he had long tried to erase from his memory. After several agonizing minutes of intense scrutiny, his fingers tracing every rivet and panel, Silas's eyes narrowed. He found it a subtle, almost invisible seam near the base, disguised as a natural crack in the rock. "Here," he murmured, pointing to it with a gloved finger. "There's a manual override. Old-style hydraulic system, I think. Probably a pressure plate lock, or something similar." He began to probe the seam with a specialized tool from his backpack, a thin, hardened steel probe with a flexible tip. He listened intently, his ear pressed against the cold metal, listening for the faint clicks and whirs of the internal mechanisms. His task was immensely complex. The locking system was designed with redundancies, a labyrinth of interconnected gears and levers, all stiffened by decades of disuse and corrosion. Silas worked slowly, methodically. His breath held, his brow furrowed in concentration. He applied precise pressure here, a delicate twist there, his fingers moving with an almost balletic grace, coaxing the ancient mechanism back to life. He muttered to himself, almost inaudibly, about the tolerances, the materials, the idiots who used a spring-loaded deadbolt on a primary access point. Evelyn watched, mesmerized, utterly useless, but completely captivated by the sheer brilliance unfolding before her. She saw not an old man, but a master craftsman, a mechanical virtuoso operating on a scale she had never imagined. Suddenly, with a faint but distinct click, followed by a deep, guttural groan that resonated through the earth, the massive door slowly, ponderously, began to swing inward, a wave of stale, frigid air, thick with the scent of ozone, dust, and something indefinably metallic, rushed out, carrying with it the deafening hum of unseen machinery. The opening was a gaping maw of darkness, a portal to a buried past. Silas, Barley, and Evelyn peered into the abyss, their headlamps cut through the oppressive gloom, revealing a massive concrete-lined tunnel stretching into the impenetrable darkness. The tunnel was damp, the walls glistening with condensation, and the air was heavy, oppressive. As they cautiously stepped inside, their footsteps echoing eerily in the vast space, the beam of their lights illuminated a colossal, sprawling complex. It was a nuclear bunker, or perhaps a command center, designed to withstand the apocalypse. A silent testament to the terrifying anxieties of the Cold War. Rusting control panels lined the walls, their myriad buttons and switches frozen in time. Cables, thick as pythons, snaked along the floor and ceiling, disappearing into the cavernous depths. The sheer scale was overwhelming, a monument to human ingenuity and paranoia. A wave of profound awe, mixed with a chilling sense of dread, washed over them. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an entry into a forbidden world, a hidden relic of a global conflict. The air was thick with history, with the ghosts of scientists and military strategists who had once populated these halls, preparing for a war that, mercifully, never fully materialized. But their moment of triumph was brutally short-lived. From the inky blackness behind them, where the tunnel stretched back towards the now open door, a sudden sharp voice cut through the silence. "Going somewhere, old man." Silas, Evelyn, and Barley spun around, their lights flashing wildly. Standing silhouetted against the faintly glowing entrance, their forms cloaked in tactical black gear, was a group of imposing figures. They moved with a chilling efficiency, their weapons held ready. At their head stood a man, tall and lean, with eyes that gleamed with cold, calculating intelligence. He was impeccably dressed, even in the depths of a hidden bunker, his suit tailored, his expression utterly devoid of warmth. This was Agent Thorne, the insidious figurehead of the Custodians, a rogue, highly secretive organization composed of former intelligence operatives and military contractors. Thorne had been tracking Silas and Evelyn since Brody's initial report, using advanced satellite surveillance and ground teams to follow their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to intercept. He was the Pejoi Jiao Loai a man driven by greed and a ruthless desire to exploit this unearthed secret for his own illicit gain. Well, Thorne continued, his voice smooth as silk, yet laced with a menacing edge. It seems our persistent little dog has finally led us to the prize. And you, Mr. Blackwood, I didn't think I'd see you again. Not after all these years. His eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, the light of their headlamps illuminating a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk on his lips. You know, Silas, I remembered a brilliant engineer, a bit too curious for his own good, who worked on Project Sentinel, a man with a unique understanding of secure facilities, a man who simply vanished after a minor incident. And that scar on your hand, old friend, a distinct mark of a very specific, very classified accident, wasn't it? Thorne paused, letting his words hang in the heavy air, a chilling revelation. This facility, you see, was never fully decommissioned. It contains certain assets, highly valuable assets, and you, Mr. Blackwood, with your particular set of skills and your accidental discovery, have made my job considerably easier. You've unlocked my vault for me. His gaze swept over the vast, abandoned bunker, a covetous gleam in his eyes. He wasn't interested in history or truth. He was interested in profit, in power, in exploiting the remnants of a forgotten war. Silas felt a jolt of ice shoot through him. The fragments of memory, long suppressed, suddenly coalesced into a terrifying clarity. Project Sentinel, the colossal machinery, the blinding flash, the scar. He had been here before. He had helped build this place, or places like it. He had been a part of the very secret he had now unwittingly uncovered. His past, the very reason he had chosen a life of quiet solitude, had finally caught up to him, dragging him back into a nightmare he thought he had escaped. The shock was profound, shattering his carefully constructed reality. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes fixed on Silas. The revelation of his direct involvement, the unspoken history etched on his hand, was a stunning twist. Barley, sensing the escalating threat, let out a deep, guttural growl, a low, menacing rumble that resonated through the cavernous space. He positioned himself defensively in front of Silas and Evelyn, his hackles raised, his teeth bared in a silent, unwavering promise of protection. Thorn's armed agents, though seemingly disciplined, exchanged uneasy glances. The sudden revelation of Silas's true identity, and the palpable shift in the air, created a fleeting moment of hesitation, a crack in their professional facade. They had anticipated a simple retrieval, not a confrontation with a ghost from a classified past. The grand, silent fortress, a relic of a bygone era, had become the stage for a dramatic, unforeseen confrontation, where the secrets of the Cold War threatened to consume them all. The revelation of Silas Blackwood's past hung heavy in the air, a thick, suffocating cloud within the vast, echoing chamber of the unseen fortress. Agent Thorne's casual cruelty, the unveiling of Silas's involvement in Project Sentinel, had momentarily stunned everyone, including some of Thorne's own operatives. It was a brief, almost imperceptible crack in their hardened professionalism, a flicker of doubt born from the sheer audacity of the secret that Silas now embodied. For Silas, the shock was profound, but with it came a chilling clarity. He was no longer just an old man seeking answers. He was a ghost from a buried past. And the man before him, Thorne, represented the insidious forces that had tried to keep that past entombed. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now laced with a steely resolve. He had to stop Thorne. "You're a fool, Thorne." Silas's voice, though quiet, resonated with a newfound authority that surprised even himself. This place was sealed for a reason. There are protocols, safeguards. You have no idea what you're tampering with. He scanned the cavernous chamber, his eyes darting from the rusted control panels to the massive, silent machinery that lay dormant, yet hummed with a latent power. His engineer's mind, fully awakened, began to calculate, to recall, to connect the scattered fragments of memory to the physical realities of the bunker. He knew this place. He had designed its defenses. Thorne merely scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips. "Protocols, safeguards. We're beyond that. Old man. This is about power, about opportunity. The Cold War is over. Its relics are ours for the taking. And you, Silas, you're just an inconvenient ghost. You'll be removed, along with the good doctor here." He gestured with a dismissive flick of his hand towards Evelyn, who stood frozen in a mixture of terror and furious disbelief, and then to Barley, whose low growl had intensified into a deep, vibrating snarl. "You don't understand the interlocks." Silas pressed, ignoring Thorne's threats, his mind racing through schematics he hadn't thought of in decades. "The fail-safes. This isn't just a vault. It's a bomb waiting to go off if you don't know the sequences. The power grid alone could fry you all." Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "A desperate bluff. Silas, my team has bypassed worse. We have schematics. You know. Not as detailed as your memories. Perhaps. But enough." He gestured to one of his men, who began to approach a large, complex control panel. Silas knew he had one chance. His mind, sharper than it had been in years, processed every detail: the location of the main power conduit, the ancient ventilation systems, the emergency lockdown mechanisms. He remembered the primary purpose of this particular sector of the facility: not just storage, but a fail-safe command center, designed to disable or destroy compromised sections if breached. And he remembered the hidden fail-safe, a last resort, known only to a handful of lead engineers. It was a chaotic, dangerous gamble, but it was their only way out. "Barley, Evelyn, get behind that structural column, now." Silas roared, his voice echoing with a surprising force through the cavern. Evelyn, though terrified, reacted instantly to the urgency in Silas's tone, pulling Barley with her behind a massive, concrete support column. Just as Silas lunged, he didn't lunge at Thorne, but at a section of the control panel furthest from the agents, a section they were ignoring. With a speed that belied his age, his fingers, once again extensions of his brilliant mind, danced across the corroded buttons and switches. He bypassed the main system, overriding the external controls Thorne's men were attempting to access. He knew the specific sequence, the hidden diagnostic port, the back door he himself had helped design, meant for emergency disabling. A piercing, deafening siren immediately blared to life, tearing through the silent bunker, vibrating through their very bones. Red emergency lights flashed erratically, casting grotesque, dancing shadows across the concrete walls. The sudden noise, the jarring lights, threw Thorne's highly disciplined team into disarray. "What the hell was that?" Thorne bellowed, his voice losing its calm composure. "That?" Silas shouted back over the wail of the siren, as he slammed a final rusted lever down. "Is the emergency purge sequence. This section is being ventilated, and in 30 seconds, the automatic blast doors will seal this sector, trapping anyone inside." It was a partial lie, a desperate bluff mixed with truth. He had indeed activated a high-pressure ventilation system, drawing in fresh, cold air and expelling the stale, ozone-rich air from the bunker, making it intensely uncomfortable. But the blast doors were a delayed, much more complex sequence he hoped to initiate later. The sudden influx of roaring air, the blinding red lights, and the terrifying wail of the siren created a chaotic, disorienting whirlwind. Thorne's agents, trained for stealth and precision, were now caught off guard, their formations breaking. "Get him!" Thorne shrieked, pointing at Silas, but the cacophony made it almost impossible to hear. Silas didn't wait. He dashed towards another console, farther down the tunnel, towards the main access tunnels. Just as Thorne's agent surged forward, a new sound erupted, one Silas hadn't factored in. A loud, distressed barking and whimpering from Barley, followed by Evelyn's terrified scream. One of Thorne's agents, enraged by the unexpected chaos, had turned his frustration on the dog. Barley, in his attempt to protect Evelyn, had lunged, and the agent had struck him, sending the old retriever sprawling, a pained cry escaping his muzzle. A primal roar tore from Silas's throat, a sound born of pure, unadulterated fury. Barley was more than a pet. He was family, his last, loyal connection to a world he had long tried to shut out. The pain of seeing his oldest friend harmed, the violation of his sanctuary, fueled a rage that burned away all fear. He abandoned the complex console he was heading for. Instead, he spun around, his eyes locking onto the agent who had hurt Barley, with a speed no one expected from a man of his age. Silas grabbed a heavy, discarded metal pipe that lay near a stack of crates. He moved with a precision honed by decades of working with heavy machinery, his movements economical and powerful. He didn't swing wildly. He targeted the agent's knee, a swift, deliberate strike that sent the man crumpling to the floor with a scream. Then, Silas lunged for the agent's dropped weapon, a tactical handgun, his fingers closing around the cold metal. He had not held a weapon in decades, but the muscle memory was there, a ghost from a different time. He raised it, not aiming to kill, but to incapacitate, to defend. Thorne, witnessing Silas's sudden, violent transformation, momentarily froze. This was not the broken old engineer he had anticipated. This was something else, something dangerous, something utterly unpredictable. "He's armed. Take him down," Thorne roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and rage. The bunker became a maelstrom of flashing lights, blaring sirens, and shouted commands. Silas, now a man possessed, moved with a strange, fluid grace, using the tight confines and the flickering lights to his advantage. He fired a single shot, deliberately aiming for a hanging light fixture, plunging a section of the tunnel into deeper shadows, further disorienting Thorne's men. Then, he ducked behind a stack of rusted supply barrels, reloading with practiced ease, his hands surprisingly steady. He wasn't just defending himself, he was actively disrupting Thorne's operation, turning the bunker's own chaos against them. Suddenly, from the far end of the tunnel, a new sound cut through the din, a distant, but unmistakably familiar wail of police sirens, growing rapidly louder. It was Sheriff Brody. Evelyn, despite her terror, had managed to scramble behind the column with Barley and, with trembling fingers, sent a desperate text message to the only person she thought might listen, Brody. Her message was simple. Stark, bunker armed men. Silas in danger, abandoned site map coordinates. She had hoped her academic reputation would lend credibility, and the sheer desperation in her words, along with the precise coordinates, had finally cut through Brody's skepticism. Sheriff Brody, a man of rigid adherence to procedure and a deep-seated distrust of anything outside the norm, had initially scoffed at Evelyn's frantic text. Bunker-armed men, Dr. Reed must have hit her head, but the coordinates, precise and undeniable, pointed to a blank spot on his own official maps, an area he had always dismissed as just dense wilderness. And then, he saw it on his patrol car's dash cam, the faint, metallic glint of a drone, flying low and fast from the direction of Silas's woods, clearly indicating a presence beyond the natural. His practical mind, however unwillingly, connected the dots. The frantic, uncharacteristic tone of Evelyn's message, combined with the drone sighting and his earlier encounter with Silas's peculiar tools, finally shattered his ingrained skepticism. He didn't call for backup. He simply floored the accelerator. Lights flashing, sirens blaring, a grim determination setting on his face. He might have dismissed Silas as an eccentric, but he was still a resident of his town, and Brody would protect his own. The sound of approaching sirens sent a ripple of panic through Thorne's team. "Local law enforcement," one agent yelled. "They're on to us." Thorne cursed, his face contorted in a mask of frustrated fury. His plans were unraveling, violently and unexpectedly. "Fall back. Secure the data we're extracting." He knew local police wouldn't be able to handle this level of operation, but their presence meant federal authorities would soon follow, a bureaucratic nightmare that would jeopardize his entire illicit scheme. He couldn't risk exposure. His primary goal shifted from exploitation to escape, and taking Silas alive was no longer worth the risk. As Thorne's agents began to retreat, a desperate scramble for the entrance, Silas, despite his age, continued to harry them. He fired another shot, disabling a critical power conduit near the exit, causing a shower of sparks and forcing them to scramble over smoking rubble. Evelyn, her terror slowly giving way to a fierce admiration, crawled towards the injured Barley, cradling his head, whispering reassurances. Just as Thorne himself was about to disappear into the fading light of the tunnel entrance, he turned, his eyes blazing with hatred, and fired a wild shot back towards Silas. The bullet ricocheted off the concrete wall near Silas's head, sending chips of rock flying, a stark reminder of the deadly stakes. But Silas, surprisingly calm, held his ground. Thorne's team, having abandoned their valuable equipment, scrambled out into the blinding sunlight, disappearing into the dense forest just as Sheriff Brody's cruiser burst through the broken perimeter fence, its tires spitting gravel, its sirens wailing a final, triumphant note. Brody, weapon drawn, cautiously entered the bunker, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene, the blaring siren, the flashing lights, the lingering smell of ozone and gunpowder. He found Silas standing amidst the wreckage, the handgun still clutched in his hand, his chest heaving, but his eyes clear and resolute. Evelyn, tear-streaked but unharmed, was crouched over Barley, who let out a weak but reassuring whine. "Silas," Brody called out, his voice filled with a stunned disbelief that quickly morphed into respect. What in God's name happened here?" He saw the overturned equipment, the scattered weapons, the signs of a struggle. This was no old man's delusion. This was real. Silas, lowering the handgun, looked at Brody, his gaze steady. "The echoes of the Cold War, Sheriff," he replied, his voice raspy from exertion. "They just got a lot louder." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of revelation. Brody, seeing the raw truth in Silas's eyes, the undeniable evidence of the chaos, finally understood the profound mistake he had made. The cynical, dismissive Sheriff Brody had been shattered, replaced by a man humbled and utterly awestruck by the quiet heroism of the old engineer he had so foolishly underestimated. Later, as the federal authorities, summoned by a now chastened Brody, swarmed the site, securing the bunker and beginning their meticulous investigation, Silas sat on a fallen log outside, Barley resting his head on his lap, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his injured paw. Evelyn sat beside him, her hand gently stroking Barley's fur. "I'm so sorry, Silas," Brody said, approaching them, his face etched with genuine remorse. He had shed his professional detachment, replaced by a raw, human apology. "I should have listened. I had no idea. You were right all along." He extended a hand, no longer arrogant, but humble. "Thank you for protecting my town, for being here." Silas, for the first time, saw a different man in Brody, a man stripped of his pride, revealing a core of integrity. He shook Brody's hand, a firm, forgiving grip. "It's all right, Sheriff," Silas replied softly, the rage having dissipated, replaced by a quiet weariness. "We all have blind spots." He then looked at Evelyn, a flicker of something close to gratitude in his eyes. "And you, Dr. Reed, you were the only one who didn't dismiss me." Evelyn smiled, a tired but triumphant expression. "It was the bolt, Mr. Blackwood, and your unique expertise. You were the key, Silas, the only one who could have opened this." Silas looked down at Barley, gently scratching behind his ears. "And the key, it seems, found its own way back to me." He looked out at the now bustling scene, the federal agents in their crisp uniforms moving through the ancient woods, the flashing lights painting the trees in surreal hues. "This place, it's haunted me for decades. I was part of it, a small cog in a giant, terrifying machine. I ran from it, from the responsibility, from the knowledge. The scar on my hand, it's from a catastrophic failure, a near meltdown, years ago. I thought I'd escaped it all, buried it here, along with these memories." He gestured vaguely at the bunker. "But Barley, he dug it all up. And in doing so, he dug me up too." His voice was heavy with the weight of a lifetime of suppressed guilt and trauma. It wasn't just a discovery, Evelyn. It was an unburdening. His words hung in the crisp autumn air, a profound confession shared with his newfound allies. The Cold War, once a distant, abstract threat, had echoed through the quiet pines, forcing Silas Blackwood to confront his past, and in doing so, finally begin to heal. The rusty bolt, that simple object from the woods, had not just led to a historical revelation, but to a deeply personal catharsis, finally freeing Silas from the silent prison of his own making. 5 years later, the scent of fresh brewed coffee mingled with the crisp autumn air as Silas Blackwood opened the windows of his once secluded wooden cabin. Sunlight, warm and inviting, streamed into the spacious living room, illuminating the subtle dust motes dancing in the air. The view was no longer of a silent, intimidating wall of trees that had once guarded his secrets, but of a winding path, well trodden by curious feet, leading to his now bustling home. This was a far cry from the small, anonymous dwelling that had once served as his personal fortress of solitude. His life, too, had undergone a seismic shift, transforming from one of deliberate isolation to one of quiet purpose and profound connection. Silas Blackwood was no longer the reclusive old engineer, hidden away from the world. After the events in the unseen fortress, his unparalleled knowledge of Cold War-era secure facilities and his uncanny ability to decipher their complex, forgotten systems became an invaluable asset. He had, at Evelyn Reed's urging, and with Sheriff Brody's endorsement, accepted a unique role as a senior consultant for a specialized government task force dedicated to identifying, assessing, and safely decommissioning abandoned Cold War sites across the nation. He worked with a quiet intensity, his insights often proving invaluable in complex cases where modern technology failed to penetrate the layers of vintage security. He was no longer just fixing clocks. He was safeguarding the future by expertly dismantling the ghosts of the past. The gnawing ache in his chest, a constant companion for so long, had finally begun to recede, replaced by a sense of purpose and genuine contentment. He traveled frequently, but his cabin remained his anchor, a symbol of his hard-won peace. On his mantelpiece, no longer hidden in a dusty box but prominently displayed, sat the single rusty bolt that Barley had first brought him. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a potent symbol. It represented the moment his carefully constructed wall of solitude began to crumble, the catalyst for his reluctant re-entry into the world. It was a reminder of Barley's unwavering loyalty, Evelyn's unwavering belief, and Brody's eventual transformation. The deep, dark memories of Project Sentinel, once a source of debilitating guilt and trauma, were now understood. The scar on his hand, once a private mark of a suppressed nightmare, was now a visible testament to a past faced and overcome, a badge of a quiet heroism. He had not just uncovered a secret. He had, in turn, uncovered himself. Silas's transformation wasn't limited to his professional life. He had begun to actively engage with the community, a world he had once deliberately kept at arm's length. His cabin, once silent, now often hummed with the quiet chatter of visitors. He regularly hosted small groups of local history students from Evelyn's university, eager to learn about the Cold War from a living, breathing, first-hand source. He would share anecdotes, explain the intricacies of the old systems, and impart lessons on the importance of critical thinking and seeking the truth beyond official narratives. He found a profound satisfaction in mentoring these young minds, encouraging them to question, to explore, and to understand the weight of history. It was his way of paying it forward, transforming his own hard-won lessons into guidance for others, ensuring that the mistakes of the past were not forgotten, but learned from. He also established a small, private fund, managed by Evelyn and Sheriff Brody, funded by the consultation fees he received. The Pines Preservation and Historical Truth Fund was dedicated to two key initiatives supporting local historical research into the Cold War era, ensuring that the full truth of abandoned sites was documented and understood, and the preservation of the vast natural woodlands of Oakhaven, protecting them from exploitation and ensuring they remained a place of quiet beauty, rather than a hidden burial ground for secrets. He often organized volunteer days, clearing trails and removing old debris, transforming the very woods that had held his secret into a public resource for future generations. Barley, now exceptionally old but still vibrant in spirit, remained Silas's steadfast companion. Though his walks were shorter and his naps longer, his presence was a constant source of comfort and quiet joy. He still nudged Silas's hand for affection, and sometimes, with a wistful look, would retrieve a small, harmless stick from the edge of the woods, a gentle echo of his past persistence. The gentle ring of his phone pulled Silas from his thoughts. He smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached his eyes, as he saw the caller ID. It was Evelyn, calling about a new historical finding related to the local archives. He knew Brody would likely be joining them for dinner later, perhaps bringing some fresh fish from the lake. The once strained relationships had blossomed into deep, unshakable friendships, forged in the crucible of shared danger and profound discovery. "Hey, Evelyn," Silas answered, his voice easy and relaxed. "Any exciting new documents for me to decipher?" He hung up the phone, a comfortable silence settling around him, a silence that was no longer empty, but full of the quiet hum of a meaningful life. He walked back to the window, gazing out at the vibrant park-like setting of his property. Children from town occasionally played nearby, their laughter echoing through the trees. Leaves rustled gently in the breeze, and the city hummed with the quiet symphony of life. He was no longer just an observer. He was a participant. The man who had once sought invisibility now stood firmly in the light, not seeking applause or recognition, but simply existing, authentically and fully, a testament to the enduring power of truth and the quiet strength of a man who found his purpose in the rust of a forgotten bolt. The final image was of Silas Blackwood, standing tall, a subtle smile playing on his lips, as the afternoon sun cast a long, comforting shadow behind him. The rusty bolt on his mantelpiece caught the golden light, its corroded surface now gleaming, no longer a symbol of dread, but of a past remembered, a present embraced, and a future, finally, brimming with the quiet promise of hope, a legacy forged in the heart of the New England pines. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.